Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Chris Uhlmann. Coming up, the election countdown as we enter the straight who's in front and is a hung parliament likely. The war over dollars and cents continues and they're back. Kevin Rudd and Mark Latham take over our TV screens this Sunday night. Our regular Friday panel joins me, former John Howard Chief of Staff Arthur Sinodinos, former Labor Senator Stephen Loosley and ABC Online Chief Political Writer Annabel Crabb. But first, with just a week until Election Day, we look at how both parties and their leaders are faring. After a shocking start, Julia Gillard is looking stronger. Her smooth performance on the ABC's Q&A seems to have given her a new momentum. In contrast, Tony Abbott looked underprepared on the 7:30 report. But Wednesday night's public forum at Rooty Hill saw the coalition stocks rise again. So, has the Liberal Party peaked? Is the Labor Party's late launch a stroke of genius? Is a hung parliament a real possibility? And is any personality or policy actually breaking through to voters? All those questions and more answered, I hope, soon. But first, The Drum's Steve Kinane has been asking voters in Melbourne's Federation Square what they think of the campaign so far.
It's been a lot of negativity rather than positivity. I'm looking for announcements that go to the issues of education. I'm looking for housing. I'm looking for infrastructure. The NBN debate is certainly one that's interesting me with 4 teenage children. So I think that's an important one. I think Tony Abbott's got that very wrong.
There's not much going on for either party. Defensive game. He who fouls up least wins.
I've never felt so bored with an election.
Why's that?
Well, no idea, but neither of the leaders are doing anything for me.
One spends all the money, one makes the money, then the other one gets in and spends all the money. So it's the same. There's been nothing different in the last, my time.
There's a lot of negative advertising against the other parties and a lot of money wasted on that.
Tony Abbott seems to be sort of growing up a bit with his campaign, and up until now I've thought he was a bit of a child with the way he was acting, but now he seems to have sort of got himself together a bit more, yeah.
Does he seem prime ministerial to you?
Getting there, yeah, definitely.
Julia Gillard seems to be changing her policy on a daily basis. I don't believe in the real her that she's promoting, but equally the opposition hasn't come forward with anything too convincing yet either.
Absolutely nothing has stood out in the campaign so far. You could even say, is there a campaign?
That's not a bad question. Is there a campaign? One woman there, Arthur, could barely drag herself away from feeding the pigeons to talk about the campaign.
Barreling them.
She was. What do you think?
Well, Chris, that either tells you there are a lot of people who've already made up their minds and are tuned out, or there are some people who won't tune in till close to the end. This is where Gillard having her launch on the Monday may either play very well or play badly. I'm of the school that I think she's leaving it a bit late. I think she needs a bit of time to spruik her policy wares a bit more in terms of what may be in the policy speech. But this is a week, next week, which is going to be dominated by also press club appearances by all three leaders. So it becomes a messy and quite congested week. So at the moment, I'd have to say I'm thinking that Abbott's had not a bad week, particularly after Rooty Hill. I think Gillard has come back this week, had a much smoother ride this week. But as we go into the stretch, the final home stretch, I honestly don't think either of them has quite established a decisive lead over the other.
I think Arthur makes a fair point in the summary. I think it's still in the mix, although at the moment virtually all the polls suggest that given the strength of the coalition in Queensland and New South Wales, they're still in front. And if the election were held tomorrow, the probability is of a coalition victory. Of course, it's being held in a week's time. The Labor campaign launch for Monday, Chris, as we've discussed before, is designed to begin the final week with strength, continue the momentum right through until polling day, because Arthur's observation about the timing of policy launches is right in the traditional sense, but the electorate's changing. And we saw with some of those remarks, people obviously who still haven't made up their mind or even engaged with the campaign. The low engaged in politics don't look at these issues until right on the eve of the poll. And these days, that's estimated to be anywhere up to about 15 to 20% of the electorate. So Labor's campaign, in terms of resources, limited resources, designed to focus in the final week, and the campaign launch on Monday.
Well, we pay Annabel Crabb to be engaged with these things. So, Annabel, you feel desperately engaged with this campaign?
Well, I am engaged, but then, I'm particularly interested in politics. I think there's plenty of people that aren't engaged in this campaign, and the last correspondent of Steve's there who said, is this really a campaign at all? I think there is a level of public frustration about the extent to which both major parties are kind of, whittling back their areas of difference so that the areas of choice between the two parties seem to be disappearing. I think that this campaign is unusual because it doesn't really have any particular clear national themes. And there's sort of two reasons for that, I think. One is that we had 3 years ago a campaign that was all about big national themes. And it's almost as though there's sort of reform exhaustion on that front. Having just had a big change election, there's the areas of change that figured so prominently in that campaign have since withered on the vine a little bit. I mean, 3 years ago, the emissions trading scheme, climate change was the most pressing moral issue of our generation, and it's been somewhat smothered in this campaign. So I think that explains possibly some of the cynicism that voters feel. But the other reason why I think we're not seeing a sort of a narrative of very engaging, sweeping policy proposals is that there isn't a lot of money around to do them. So you see that the announcements that Labor is making, and I think both sides have had a better week this week. It's been more substantive. Both candidates have looked more confident, I think. You had Julia Gillard saying that she wanted the next major economic reform agenda to be about education. She's attempting to ally herself with the memory of great Labor reformers by saying, this will be my reform area. But what she's giving us effectively is policy promises that stretch out over not just one election, but in some cases two. A lot of this spending is pushed back into the out years. And because of the funding, what they call the tight fiscal envelope, which is fancy talk for we spread all this money around over the last year or two and now there's nothing left, the coalition's bound by that too. So their spending promises tend to be sort of rearrangements of the governments. Just to pick up something that Annabel said, if there is no compelling reason to change, doesn't that favour the incumbent?
That's what occurred to me as I listened to the people in Federation Square in Melbourne. The element that's missing if there is to be a change of government, and I stand by what I said, I still think the coalition is in front at the moment, and the indicators are there to underline that. In 72, 75, 83, 96, 07, there was a palpable a view in the electorate, almost a determination to see a change of government. And that cut both ways, for Labor and for the coalition at different times. I don't detect that either here or elsewhere. Now, in some of the regions of Australia, that may be different. But at the moment, I don't detect that level of seething resentment that really underpins the tossing out of a government.
Arthur, that's a hard thing if you're pushing against inertia, isn't it?
I think what Steve says is right. It should favour the incumbent. But what I think Abbott is saying is, should you give this lot a second chance? And will they perform any better? And what's the guarantee of performing better? And in a sense, he's turning the question back and saying, well, what makes Gillard different to Rudd? A, she was there for a lot of what happened, and B, has she, in this campaign, sufficiently differentiated herself from Rudd and the Rudd agenda and from the things that got Rudd into trouble? Now, Bibb and others would say, well, there were certain personality characteristics of Rudd which exacerbated the problems they had, and Julia doesn't have any of those. But if the electorate don't get a sufficient sense of Julia having a distinctive agenda, they may just think, well, maybe this lot just don't have what it takes and we should give the other lot a go until Labor get their act together.
I guess one of the things too is we look at this globally, we're looking at the big national picture, but in fact it is 150 local fights, and it's fewer than that. In fact, it's broken down to about 30 fights that matter. And you've been looking at what's happening under the radar, haven't you, Annabel?
Yeah, I think that in a campaign where there is an absence of that national sort of agenda, and to an extent I think there has been a bit of a theme this week on broadband. I think that's the closest that you come to a national sort of debate. But in the absence of that, you've got a particular situation in this campaign where the seats that need to be won and lost are almost overwhelmingly in Queensland and New South Wales. So you've got the coalition trying to link unpopular state governments with the federal government. But you also have the margins that are so close that and the issues that are particularly endemic to each particular electorate. So you've got the government campaigning very attentively on a local level. And I was just looking through the tiny announcements that the government's been making in the last couple of weeks. And I just looked at yesterday's, for instance, and noticed, I mean, rather splendidly, there was a $500,000 electoral bribe for Bribey Island, which I thought was pleasingly literal. No, I mean, it was, I'm sure, perfectly sensible spending.
And understandable.
Yeah,
yep.
But that's a 1.9% seat. But what overwhelms these sort of small announcements that are being made on an electorate by electorate basis is that there's plenty of crime and public safety announcements. Lots of sort of $500,000 spent on closed-circuit TV, for instance, which seems to be a very voguish way for incumbent governments to sort of sandbag these electorates. And I'm wondering, well, this makes me wonder two things. One, is it likely that people, if they're going to commit crimes, will now head to safe electorates rather than marginal ones? Yeah, I know if I was going to do a spot of drunken loitering, I would definitely be in a safe electorate right about now because marginal electorates are full of CCTV. But it also makes me think that, you know, we might be in for something that looks a bit more like the recent South Australian election, you know, where there was a broader campaign that was absolutely dogged by the most ludicrous events. But on the ground, there was a very targeted local campaign that caused an unpopular government to maintain power.
Gentlemen?
Micro-campaigning's been with us for some